Hi, I'm Steve Gamache, and on behalf of Mark Richmond and Susan Brown, owners of Chefknivestogo, we'd like to welcome you to this Introduction to Japanese Kitchen Knives tutorial. Our goal here is to give you the basic knowledge you need to help navigate through that often confusing and intimidating array of knives available. And we all know that Mark has a lot of different knives available on the Chefknivestogo website. Now, this is our home. This is not a studio environment, so you'll hear our dogs occasionally snorting or making noise. You'll hear traffic going by, etc. I also don't have a professional crew here holding cue sheets and such, so I will be referring to my cue sheets as necessary because we have a lot of material to cover. What you're going to learn during this tutorial are some of the characteristics that make up the Japanese-style knife versus a European-style knife, for example. We're going to talk about some of the different types and styles available and sizes available, some of the more common types. And we're going to talk about knife anatomy, the different parts of the knife and correct terms for those, so we have a common language to use when talking about that. We're going to talk about blade profiles and how that relates to cutting and length and styles and so on. We're going to talk about Western versus Japanese construction, Western versus Japanese handles, and the types of steel used to make the blades, and also a little bit about knife care and maintenance. If you're wondering, who is this guy? I'm not a culinary professional. I'm not a chef. I'm not a line cook. I am a home cook. But what I am is a video producer and a photographer and an educator. So what you're going to see is a product of my experience thus far with Japanese knives and the knowledge that I've gained from the Chefknivestogo website and those amazing forums. There are many very experienced people willing to share some awesome information on those forums, and I'll reiterate it again, but you need to take advantage of those Chefknivestogo forums. It's a wealth of information. So let's get started. So what are some of the differences between Japanese knives and their European counterparts? There's lots of types of Japanese knives, but let's take an example used by most Western chefs and cooks, and that is the standard European chef's knife. So this is a German 8-inch chef's knife. The number one difference is the steel used to make the blades. Japanese knives typically use much harder steel in their knives than those used in their Western counterparts. This does a few things for us. First of all, the edge bevels can be made much more acute, resulting in better cutting performance. Second, Japanese knives tend to have better edge retention, sometimes much better edge retention than their Western counterparts because of that harder steel. That's important if you're a professional working a 12-hour shift and you need a knife that's going to keep you going throughout that shift. Also, the blades can be thinner, sometimes much thinner and lighter than their European counterpoints. So, more acute cutting edges, longer edge retention, thinner, lighter blades are some of the main characteristics of that steel. Another feature that separates Japanese knives from traditional European-style chef knives is the lack of this bolster at the heel. Most European-style knives have a pretty good-sized bolster right back by the heel, and this bolster does add some weight and mass to the knife. One of the advantages of not having a bolster is you will lose some of that weight and mass and create a lighter knife. Another one that some people don't think about is this bolster definitely gets in the way of sharpening. Once you get the knife down where you're sharpening a little bit more of the blade and moving into the blade metal a little bit more, this bolster will get in your way, and you'll have to actually file part of it down to get clearance back on the knife to correctly sharpen the knife. So Japanese knives without a bolster back at the heel are actually much easier to sharpen and less hassle to sharpen than a full bolster heel type knife like this. Additionally, some people think it's a safety issue, and it's for safety having a bolster back there when you put your finger back in there when you're gripping the knife. If you use correct technique when using the knife and correct grip, you should not have any kind of safety issues with not having a regular bolster back there and just going right into the choil of the knife. In my opinion, it's not a safety issue if the knife, again, is correctly used and correctly held. It's not a safety issue. So that's one of the big differences is the bolster. Now, not all Japanese knives are necessarily made in Japan. Mark Richmond has developed a great line of knives called the Richmond Artifacts line, and these are entirely made in the United States. They're made out of great steel. They have really nice blade profiles. They're really good performers, and they represent an excellent value. If made in Japan is something on your requirements list, then you have to look for that. If not, these might be an excellent option for you. The other really cool thing about Japanese knives is you can get something from this basic utilitarian, high-performance, high-value knife, the Richmond Artifacts, to a handmade but functional work of art like this Masakage Yuki Gyuto. This is a tool you can use every day in your kitchen, whether professional or home, and admire and get a lot of great work done with it and not have to hang it on the wall and look at it. So Japanese knives are awesome because there's such a wide range of styles, price ranges, and features available to you. So let's dig deeper. It's a good idea to learn the terms that describe the various parts or anatomy of the knife. That gives us a common language to work with. So we're going to use a gyuto as an example. This is a Masakage Yuki. And we're going to work our way from the tip all the way down to the handle. So, of course, at the top of the knife, on the pointy end, you have the tip. And that gives way into the belly or curved portion of the knife with the arc to it, which then towards the rear of the blade, you have the flatter section known as the heel. And then you have the very end of the blade at the back end, known as the chin. Behind the chin, you have the choil, which is the back part of the blade where your finger would go in a pinch grip. That gives way into the neck of the knife, which then either moves into the bolster on a Western style or the ferrule on a Japanese style handle. At the very top of the knife, this is known as the spine of the knife. So, tip, arc, belly of the knife, heel of the knife, chin, choil, neck, and spine. Let's also talk about how blade lengths are measured as well. Traditional Japanese measurements involve going from the tip all the way to where the ferrule starts, which does include whatever dimension the neck is. Mark on Chefknivestogo, as well as many other people, will measure the actual cutting edge of the knife. And so Mark will measure from the tip of the blade down to the heel or the very back of the heel known as the chin in a straight line. So Chefknivestogo measurements, when you see them, tip to back of the heel or chin. This particular knife, the Masakage Yuki Gyuto, is composed of a 3-layer metal sandwich, which we'll talk about later when we get to knife construction. But a couple other terms you might want to know about. On a clad knife like this, you'll have the blade face itself, and this particular one has a rustic finish. And you'll notice that at this particular point along the knife, it starts getting ground down and shaped to taper towards the edge. So the knife gets thinner and thinner and thinner at this particular point all the way down to where this particular knife is very thin behind the edge. So that area between the face of the knife and where the grind starts to thin out towards the knife edge is known as the blade road or the blade path. So you'll sometimes hear talk about blade paths or blade roads, and that's this section down here. The line that kind of differentiates the face of the blade from where the tapering starts, it's a traditional single bevel term, but it's known as the shinogi line. Some people call it the kasumi line. I'm going to use it here to describe these double bevel knives. But so if you deal with this type of knife, you'll have this shinogi line where the grind starts, tapers down. This section of the knife is known as the knife blade road or blade path. You know, the Japanese really are the ultimate specialist at developing specific cutting tools to be used in preparing the various ingredients found in Japanese cuisine. There are literally dozens of different types and sizes and styles available. To keep things simple, we're going to concentrate on just a few. The most common style, of course, used by Western cooks and chefs is the chef's knife, and the Japanese equivalent to that is the gyuto. Gyutos are available in a wide variety of sizes and styles, and they make great all-around performers in the kitchen. A smaller version of the gyuto, which looks very similar in many cases, is the petty or utility knife. Utility knives, petties are typically larger than paring knives, but smaller than full-size knives, although some petties are as long as gyutos as well. But in many cases, these are mini versions of gyutos. Another popular knife style with Japanese cuisine is the vegetable knife or nikiri. The nikiri has a very flat profile at the bottom, so it's not as suited to rock cutting as it is to chopping styles, and it also does not have a pointy tip on it like many of the other knives, but is very popular nonetheless. A cousin to the nikiri is the santoku bochu. The santoku is similar in that it has a very flat blade profile on the bottom, not too much arc to it, but it does have a pointy tip on the end, which lends a bit of versatility. They're typically a little bit shorter than many gyutos, but also are very, very popular as well. So those are 4 styles that are very, very popular. Other common types of Japanese knives include the tsujihiki, which is a slender, longer slicing knife, as well as some single bevel types, including the yanagiba, which is a sashimi slicing knife, as well as the deba, which is used to prepare fish. So let's talk about blade length. And yes, size does matter. Typically, Japanese knives show their measurements in millimeters, so the length, the height, width of the spine, and so on. An easy conversion for those of us used to inches is 25 millimeters to an inch. It's pretty close, good enough for what we're doing. And so an example, a 150 millimeter petty divided by 25 is about 6 inches long as far as the cutting knife surface. So speaking of that, here's a petty, and typical lengths on petties include 120, which is a little over 4 inches. Other popular sizes are 130 to 135. This particular one is a 130 millimeter Moritaka petty. Another popular size is a 150, which is about 6 inches long. So 150, 130, 135, and 120 are pretty popular sizes for petties. On gyutos, they range from 210 millimeter. So this particular gyuto right here would be a 210 millimeter gyuto, which is about 8 1/4 inches. Very popular size to match the 8-inch European knife a lot of people are used to. So this is a 210. The next size up from that is a 240. And 240 is a very popular size, especially amongst professionals. 240 is a little over 9 inches, so not quite 10 inches, but quite a bit more length. I don't have one here, but the next size up from that is typically a 270. And if you want a really long knife, you can get gyutos that are 300 millimeters as well. That's a long cutting tool, around the 12-inch mark. So those are popular sizes of gyutos. Nikiris vary. They range from in the 160 range to 190 millimeter range. Very popular sizes include 165s. And then Santoku Bocho, those again range in the 160 to 180 range. 160, 165s are very popular, but there are a variety of sizes available as well. So those are some basic knife sizes. Again, divide by 25 for an approximate conversion to inches. So let's move on to the next topic. A knife's profile refers to the geometry of the blade, which greatly contributes to the performance characteristics of that knife. We're going to concentrate on the European chefs and the Japanese gyuto profiles, but these will apply equally well to many petties because they're simply smaller versions of those. So let's start with a German chef's knife. These will typically have a longer arced section with more belly to them, and they'll have a shorter, flatter heel section to them. Another knife which I don't have here is the French sabatier, which is got a flatter profile with a longer heel section and a shorter, more gentler slope or belly section to the knife. Some of the Japanese knives are actually patterned after the French sabatier, including the Masamoto KS line of knives. Interestingly, Mark Richmond's Artifacts line gyutos are also patterned after the French sabatier, and they include a nice long heel section to them and a more gentle profile on the belly or arc of the blade. So a little bit flatter profile on most Japanese knives, and a flatter profile again means typically a longer heel section for push cutting if that's what you like to do, and a more gentle section for rock cutting. Some Japanese knives are very flat profile, which are less conducive to rock cutting and more conducive to push cutting. Some have a little more belly or arc to them, which are, again, a little more conducive to rock cutting, yet still retain some nice flat section for push cutting if that's your particular style. So that's one characteristic that make up the profile. Another one is when you have knife blades that are longer, and one of the reasons chefs and professionals do like longer blades is longer blades will have a stretched out geometry. So they will have a much longer, flatter heel section and a longer, gentler arc to them. And that longer heel section for people that push cut allow them to push cut larger ingredients. So it's not uncommon for professionals to use a 270 millimeter knife for that purpose. So the length of the knife does contribute to the geometry as well. Shorter knives will have a more compact arc to them, and longer knives will have a more gentle, stretched out arc to them. So that's it on knife geometry. Something else I'd like to add about the blade profile is the height of the blade. This can be an important measurement and describes the distance from the top of the spine at the heel down to the bottom near the chin. So this is known as the blade height. Different knives have varying heights to them. Typically, longer knives will be taller as well in most cases. You do want a knife that has enough height to the blade near the handle at the heel here to give you enough knuckle clearance depending on your cutting style so your knuckles don't hit, so your fingers don't hit the board. If you use proper technique on a pinch grip, you should not have a problem with any normal dimension gyuto with clearance on the cutting board at all. With tsujihikis and some other styles that are very low height knives, you may have issues and have to adjust your grip accordingly. Sometimes with petties too. But this particular knife, the Richmond Artifacts 240, has a knife height back here at the heel of around 45, I think about 46. And to differentiate that, this is the Richmond Artifacts extra tall gyuto. This particular one has around a 55 millimeter height, and I don't know if you can tell, it's a pretty tall knife. Not everybody wants a knife this tall. Some people love knives this tall, some people hate knife this tall. That depends on your personal preference. My personal sweet spot for a 240 gyuto would be somewhere in the 46 to 49 range as far as height goes. That's my particular preference. Your mileage may vary. You'll find that the 210 gyutos tend to have a little bit lower blade height. So here is a Tojiro DP 210 millimeter gyuto, and it has a proportionally lower blade height. So this one's more around the 43 millimeter or so range, and still plenty of blade clearance or knuckle clearance on the board if you need it. Some people prefer a knife with a little more height than this. Again, longer knives, usually a little more blade height, shorter knives, sometimes a little bit less blade height, but that will vary from knife to knife. Mark has the measurements of most of the knife blade heights on the site, and I'm sure he's working towards getting more of those on there so you can do head-to-head comparisons.